Chapter 1. The Rich Don't Work for Money. When Robert Kiyosaki was 9 years old, he and his best friend Mike weren't invited to a classmate's pool party because they were too poor. Feeling the sting of rejection from their peers, they asked Kiyosaki's father how they could make money. Kiyosaki's father, whom Kiyosaki calls Poor Dad, was hardworking and well-educated but not financially successful. Poor Dad suggested they ask Mike's dad to teach them instead. Despite not having made it past the 8th grade or owning fancy things, he was a successful business owner. Mike's dad, known as Rich Dad, agreed to teach the boys how to make money, but in exchange they had to work in one of his shops, earning 10 cents an hour. As the weeks passed, the boys worked, but Rich Dad taught them nothing. Kiyosaki grew frustrated. Eventually, Kiyosaki threatened to quit, furious with Rich Dad for his low wages and for not having followed through on his promise. Rich Dad then explained that he had paid Kiyosaki poorly on purpose to teach him an important lesson. He wanted Kiyosaki to learn the difference between working for money and making money work for him. Kiyosaki wasn't sure what this meant, so Rich Dad explained that he had two options. The first, Kiyosaki could remain in the rat race. That is, the pattern of get up, go to work, pay bills that most people participate in. If so, Kiyosaki would be like everyone else, accepting low wages, chasing raises and promotions, maybe getting a second job. Or, Kiyosaki could realize that having a traditional job was a short-term solution to a long-term problem. The rich don't become rich by working for money, Rich Dad explained. Instead, they have money work for them. For instance, instead of chasing salaries, they buy assets that go on to generate more cash flow. The rich don't work for money, they have money work for them. Rather than focus on chasing salaries, the rich focus on generating income through assets. This experience changed Kiyosaki's life. Poor Dad had always encouraged him to get a good education and job. He now saw this would only ever land him a position as someone's employee. As the years passed, Poor Dad lost his job while Rich Dad grew into one of the richest men in Hawaii. Kiyosaki followed in Rich Dad's footsteps, eventually retiring at 47. In 1997, he wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad to share the lessons that helped him accrue his wealth. 20 years later, it sold 32 million copies and has been published in 51 languages. Next, we'll explore the specific assets Kiyosaki recommends we focus on buying to build our wealth. Chapter 2. Assets and Liabilities. It's likely that few of us were taught financial literacy growing up. We may have learned about history and science in school, but not about taxes, for example. But without financial literacy, it's virtually impossible to become wealthy, no matter how smart or talented you are. Thus, Kiyosaki believes increasing financial literacy is the first step to becoming rich. The biggest lesson of financial literacy is simple. Understand the difference between an asset and a liability, and then buy assets. The difference between an asset and a liability. An asset puts money into your pocket. It generates income. Liability takes money out of your pocket. It generates expenses. This lesson may seem obvious, but in reality, many individuals don't know the difference between a liability and an asset. Rich people acquire assets. The poor and middle class acquire liabilities that they think are assets. For example, most people think buying a nicer house is acquiring an asset. Kiyosaki doesn't agree. He says, most people work all their lives paying for a home they never own, and that isn't guaranteed to go up in value. And if all your money is tied up in a 30-year mortgage, you won't have the funds to buy other assets or time to grow their value. If we think of our definitions, a house, therefore, can be a liability. It takes money out of your pocket without putting anything back in. We can see how assets and liabilities work in practice by comparing the cash flows of low, middle, and high-income families. Every family has expenses like food, housing, and transportation. Families with little income use it to pay for these expenses. Middle-class families with more income tend to spend it on liabilities, like a mortgage, that generate more expenses, like mortgage payments. Now, if we consider rich families' cash flow, we see a notable difference. They put their money into assets. For instance, instead of a house with a mortgage, they might acquire a rental property that generates income in the form of rent. Or they might buy other income-generating assets like stocks and bonds. This money goes back into their pockets and funds their liabilities. According to Kiyosaki, the main obstacle to becoming wealthy isn't how much money we have, it's how we use it. Thus, if people with even limited income focus on putting money into assets as soon as possible, they too can accrue wealth. To build wealth, spend money on assets that generate income rather than on liabilities. It's not how much money you make, it's how much money you keep. Chapter 3. Mind Your Business. When McDonald's founder Ray Kroc would describe his business, he wouldn't say that he worked in the hamburger industry. Kroc would say that his real business was real estate. He knew that the land and its location were the most significant factors in the success of each franchise, Kiyosaki shares. Today, McDonald's is the biggest single real estate owner in the world, owning even more land than the Catholic Church. Real estate is what made Kroc wealthy. Kroc's perspective demonstrates a crucial lesson. Understand the difference between your profession and your career. Your profession is what you do to make ends meet. Your career is what will make you wealthy. Most people think their profession is what will make them money. Someone might study law in order to become a rich lawyer, for example. The problem with this, Kiyosaki explains, is that they spend their lives minding someone else's business and making that person rich. A lawyer at a big law firm might have an impressive salary, but they're mostly making the firm rich. If you see your job as your only income stream, you'll only be able to acquire wealth through your job. This is why many people chase raises and promotions. In reality, if we want to be wealthy, we have to mind our own business. That is, focus on what will make us independently wealthy. Mind your business. To accrue wealth, focus on what will make you independently wealthy rather than on jobs or higher salaries. The best way to mind your own business is to use your salary to build a career of buying income-generating assets. Some professionals may think they already have assets, but as we saw in the last chapter, this isn't always the case. Cars, homes, or expensive workout equipment aren't real assets. They rapidly lose their value and may require constant upkeep. To start minding your own business, focus on these assets, businesses that don't require your presence. This means other people run it. If you have to be there, it becomes a job. Stocks and bonds income, generating real estate royalties from intellectual property, patents, music, scripts. Anything else that has value, produces income, or appreciates, and has a ready market. When picking assets, Kiyosaki recommends we choose things we love based on advice from Rich Dad. If you don't love it, you won't take care of it. For example, Kiyosaki buys real estate because he loves it. He could tour properties all day, and when problems come up, he's happy to deal with them. His strategy for real estate is to buy small, then continue trading up until he's able to buy larger properties. He holds most properties for less than 7 years. Kiyosaki also loves small companies. He buys stock and aims to be out of stock in a year. Once you start purchasing assets, Kiyosaki encourages you to use the money they accrue to buy more assets. This way, the money will keep working in your favor. To mind your own business, focus on buying income-generating assets, especially those you have particular passion for.